guys, my name is Emily, welcome back to my channel, and today I'm going to be wrapping up April. April was special. So I had my wisdom teeth taken out on April 5th, I guess because I'm not 16. It didn't go well. I took a lot of time off work, and in that time I read a lot of things, hence my April wrap-up part 1. So I will link that hopefully above and at the very least below if you are interested in seeing the things that I read in the first part of the month. This is part 2. With that out of the way, let's hop into the books. The first book that I read in the second part of the month was Miles Away From You by A.B. Rutledge. So this is the story of Miles, a cis pansexual boy who has spent the past year engaging in a lawsuit with his comatose black trans girlfriend's parents. And he is attempting to gain the rights to make medical decisions over her body. He ends up giving up that lawsuit because it is negatively affecting his own mental health, and it's not helping with his grieving process because his girlfriend is never coming out of this coma. His moms send him on a month-long trip to Iceland to just get out of these familiar spaces, to meet new people, maybe to hook up, maybe just to hike, maybe to make art again because he's sort of lost his muse, his will to create. My initial reaction to this was super excitement. I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed the exploration of the ways in which we grieve, and I really liked that exploration and that struggle that we saw him deal with. I initially wanted to give this book 5 stars, and then I went on Goodreads and I saw incredibly low reviews. I was like, well, I like the writing, I like the story, I like the characters, I like the representation. What is motivating people to give these reviews? And so when I looked into the reviews, I realized that I'd completely missed something, and that is the ways in which Miles is positioned as a white savior, and the ways in which positioning Vivian's parents as these villainous folks who don't respect their daughter's identity, who don't acknowledge their daughter is a daughter, in fact, who are so over-the-top religious that they just can't. They can't accept this. The story completely demonizes people of color and turns Miles into this white savior, and it made me rethink what I had gotten out of the story, what I thought the message of the story was, what I thought were the pros of the story, and it got me really thinking about critical thinking and critical reading, which is something that I talk a lot about on this channel. What this sort of inspired was a lot of research into critical thinking, as in the movement in education to teach people how to think in a way that allows them to think beyond and outside of certain boxes. Hopefully that makes sense, and I would like to do a video on critical thinking because I've had people ask, how can I think critically? How can I read critically? Can you give me tips on doing this? And if you have any questions about critical thinking and critical reading, leave those down in the comments below and I will attempt to address them in the critical thinking, critical reading video. Moving on, Call Me By Your Name by Andre Aciman, which was of course adapted into the Oscar-nominated film for Best Picture of the same name. This is the story of Elio, who falls in love with Oliver. So they're in this quiet town in Italy. It's a long, lazy summer, and Elio is really coming to terms with his sexuality. He is super desirous of Oliver, but he's never done anything sexy with a man, and it's that slow burn, the internal monologue that I loved. I loved the film. I made a video talking more about it, and I will leave a link to that hopefully above and below as well if you want to hear my full thoughts on it. This was a 5-star read for me. I will read the book again. I will watch the film many times throughout the rest of my life. The next book that I read, I picked up the day it came out. That is Becky Albertalli's new book, Leah on the Offbeat. So this is the sort of sequel to Simon versus the Homo sapiens agenda. I reviewed my reread of Simon in my April wrap-up part 1, again, linked above or below. Simon is from Simon's perspective, so I was curious to read a book from Leah's perspective. So Leah is the plus-sized drummer, artist. She really downplays herself. She doesn't have a lot of self-confidence. She doesn't feel like people like her, and when she goes places, she seems to sort of regret it and feel like it's a pity invite, and we really see her grow in confidence over the book. So this book takes place, I think, a year after Simon. So Simon is in a relationship, Nick is in a relationship, and Leah is in this girl band. So they're all a lot more segmented than they were when they were younger, when they were really a close trio. And everybody has applied for colleges and they're going on these epic road trips to visit places, and Leah can't really afford to do that. Leah is going to state college, and the other person who has applied to this school is Abby. Abby is Nick's girlfriend. Leah has never really seemed to like her, from Simon's perspective anyway. He always thought there was a lot of conflict and tension between Abby and Leah, and he could never figure out why. And we see that in Leah, and we see that break down in Leah as Leah begins to really question her feelings for people. Leah is bisexual. She's been out to her mom as bisexual for a while, but she's never come out to her group of friends. Even after Simon came out, she didn't really take that as an opportunity to be like, me too, like we have things in common. I really, really like Leah as a character. I think the book was worth the hype, and what I loved about it the most was the ways in which it dialogues with Simon, and how that dialogue, how the flipping perspective between Simon and Leah. So like we see Leah from Simon's perspective as this sort of like unconfident, jealous, needy weirdo. And then from Leah's perspective, we see Simon as this sort of love-struck, kind of self-obsessed, kind of self-absorbed, like goofy guy who she really hasn't seriously connected with in any way for a while. In reading the two books, we've been in Simon's head and we've related to Simon and we've empathized with Simon, and we sort of have seen the world filtered through Simon's eyes, and then we get that flip through Leah's eyes in Leah on the Offbeat, and we see a lot of these things that Simon interpreted one way, Leah will interpret a different way, and it has a slightly different feel. Like, I'm not sure that I like Simon from Leah's perspective as much as I liked Simon from Simon's perspective, if that makes sense. Reading the two books together and getting into the heads of two people who see each other really demonstrates the ways in which we really can't know what's going on inside other human beings. We are very much always thinking of ourselves as the star of the story, and we're filtering the world through what matters to us. And I love that Albertalli was able to get into these two characters' heads and tell a story in the same universe, in the same timeline, to have them both feel real and really convincing. I loved Leah, and I think if you want to sort of experience that, I guess, dissonance of viewing the world from one person's perspective for a while and then switching to the same world from another perspective and seeing how different that feels, I would recommend that you read Simon and Leah. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. I really, really liked it. So the next book that I read was The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. So this was a reread for me. It is part of a project to reread 12 books in 2018. I do have a video for The Virgin Suicides on my channel. If you want to see my sort of initial reaction to the thing, I haven't actually watched it. Again, what I've come to sort of have sit in my head before starting The Virgin Suicides this time was that I was alongside the narrators the first time. Like, I was really interested in figuring out what happened, sort of in the same ways that the narrators are building this archive for the Lisbon sisters, all of whom died by suicide within the span of a year. I think I was really sort of alongside them in attempting to break into this crypt. I had a professor who sort of talked about these terms, and they're things that I keep bringing up in my own reading ever since. The idea of the archive being what is public, with the bog bodies. So the archive is like the artifact itself. It's this thing that we find from history, and like we can be like, ta-da, look at this thing. It's a certain historical thing, and it has historical clothes in it, and we can tell certain things about what it ate from the lining of its stomach. And so we build this archive of physical proofs, and then oftentimes we attempt to crack open the crypt using these archival artifacts to tell a story. We look at, oh, like, it looks like the neck has been cut of this bog body. Clearly it was a woman who was sexually loose, and so she was executed and thrown in the bog. She had her throat slit and she was thrown in the bog as punishment for being a morally loose woman. Like, this is what people did back in the day. So we've attempted to break into the crypt to know this former human being's story based on the physical evidence of their body, and then we do a little more science and we're like, wait a minute, this person's a man, and the weight of the bog just twisted their fragile skin and split the neck, so, you know, now we have a different narrative for this body, and we realized we couldn't access the crypt. We had no idea about this person's life, and our whole, like, narrative making, that attempt to invade the crypt, ultimately failed. So with those terms in mind, that's what it seems to be what the neighborhood boys are doing when they're trying to amass evidence. Like, and they build sort of a shrine in their treehouse, and they study the objects, and they talk throughout the book, like, as you'll see in Exhibit 49, they're building this archive of objects in an attempt to break into the crypt, to understand the Lisbon girls as human beings, to understand where they were mentally, why they chose to end their own lives. This time I was very aware of the gaze and the ways in which the neighborhood boys spend so much time trying to see into places that are necessarily dark. They're never going to be illuminated, but they really, really want to see what's in there. I think ultimately, like with the Bog Mummies, that's just an impossibility. We will never know. I like that. I like that the book resists the making of narrative for the Lisbon sisters, that these sisters had agency over their own lives, and they still have agency over their narrative in death. Like, nobody will be able to crack into that crypt. I guess this time around, I didn't enjoy it as much as I thought I would. I mean, I enjoyed the exercise in making connections and thinking critically and employing the archive versus crypt. It wasn't a fun 5-star read that, like, left me giddy and happy in the same way that reading Leah on the Offbeat left me giddy and happy, or reading Call Me By Your Name left me giddy and, well, I cried at the end, but I wasn't left happy, but I was left emotionally moved. I did give it, I believe, 4 stars this time. So the next book that I read was Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. Trevor Noah is a comedian from South Africa. He is a colored person, so his mother was black and his father was white, and this biography sort of chronicles his life of being colored, of negotiating the struggles of being culturally more black, but physically looking more white, but not being white enough as a colored person to fit into white spaces. There were a lot of things that I found incredibly funny, and then there were others that were completely devastating, and it took me a really long time to read this because there were only so many stories that I could read in one go. Can you hear the dryer? The microphone is probably picking that up. I think this is a really important read. I think it's a really interesting read. It gives you a really interesting perspective on race. There were some moments that I flagged for discussion. There were some really great, poignant lines that made me think and made me stop. In many ways, in many places, this book didn't bring me joy, but it brought learning, and it brought a different perspective from my own life experience, and I think the experience of reading it was valuable, if not enjoyable. I would recommend that you pick this up. I think it is worth the read. I think it is worth having these discussions and thinking through some of these things that Trevor Noah brings up. I did give Born a Crime 4 stars. The last book that I have here is a gift from my partner, who knows that I am interested in manga. He did some research on like top-rated mangas, and this got super high reviews amongst women in my age bracket. That is my Lesbian Experience with Loneliness by Nagata Kabi. This is basically a manga biography in which the main character is super depressed, super anxious, really wants to break into the arts. What her passion is making art, but her parents really want her to have a salary job, to like give up this silly artistic thing, and to have benefits and like job security and life safety. She finds herself in a place where she is stuck. The weight of what her parents want versus the pull of her heart sort of results in her withdrawing from everybody, developing an eating disorder and anxiety disorders, hair pulling, depression. It results in her not being able to keep down her job as a retail worker and having to move home. And alongside of this is the narrator exploring her sexuality. It really struck a personal chord with me, just as somebody who is sort of in the same place the main character is, between being a responsible adult, taking a traditional path, and doing something really risky for your art. Those are all of the things that I read in the second half of April. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Have you read any of these things? Do you like any of these things? What was your favorite read from the month of April? Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you soon. Bye!